Great. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I think my slides are going to come up here. That's fantastic. I've just joined Hope into Action only about 2 months ago. I've spent the last 30 years of my life working with homeless people. And the previous 4 years before taking up this job, I was seconded to the government to work in the Rough Sleeping Initiative under what was the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, then became Levelling Up. And I was seconded there with a role specifically to do with how the faith groups and churches respond to rough sleeping. And it's because there isn't a town or city in the whole country where the work of churches isn't very, very significant in the response to homelessness. I just put up this slide of logos. Can anyone guess what all of these organisations have got in common? Yep. Exactly. Well, yeah, that's a good point about they're all started from church leaders or from Christians. I mean, there's obvious ones like the Salvation Army, of course, and the Church Army, London City Mission, YMCA, and in those sort of Victorian era of organisations. Then in the 60s, organisations like Shelter, started up by URC minister, Centrepoint, who I used to work for, an Anglican minister in the middle of Soho. And for all of these organisations, they are fruits of faith. I think the relevant thing is, for a lot of them, though, faith is just a footnote in their history. You know, I'm not saying they're not doing good work, but actually, even for an organisation like Emmaus, with such a biblical name, has a very complex relationship with its founding ethos. And so I think that one of the key things, and I found it so enriching what Jenny said, is how the church can respond in social action, but remain the church, and not have its mission secularised by the engagement that it does. And I see that all over the homeless sector, which is one of the reasons I was keen to join Hope into Action. I'll tell you more about them in a minute. When we look at the plight of someone who ends up sleeping rough, I always ask groups of people, you know, what are the ingredients that lead to that homelessness? And all of the answers, in my experience, fall under one of these three headings. So firstly, a poverty of resources. Now, that's the kind of poverty we were hearing a lot about yesterday in the presentation. Material poverty, the most obvious low income, unaffordability of housing, debt, benefit issues, that whole suite of practical material poverty. But that isn't the full picture. It's one of the reasons I asked the question I did last night. Because writ large over homelessness is a poverty of relationships as well. And that, you know, when I was managing a hostel in the middle of Soho, the most obvious reason that young people came through the door is because they'd had to leave the family home, whether it was aunties, uncles, parents, grandparents, whatever. And this poverty of relationships is far harder for the sector to talk about. When I was working with Centrepoint, it would produce report after report. All they would do was hammer the government for not putting enough resources into things. The issue of the family and relationships was far more difficult territory to talk about. And yet it's undeniably a huge, huge factor. And lastly, a sort of poverty of identity, probably most deeply of all. That just as people have fragile relationships with others, they also have a deeply fragile relationship with themselves, and issues of self-esteem, of mental health, of the addictions that cluster around that form of poverty. But I think this really connects to what Jenny said earlier. It shows why homelessness can never be reduced to just houselessness. Now, houses are vital resources, and the reason they're in red and on the left is for a political reason, because that's what the left is comfortable talking about. And now they're vital, and don't get me wrong, I think the biggest driver of homelessness is actually the unaffordability of housing, so that's got to change. But also we've got to be prepared to talk about relationships and how significant they are. And Hope into Action was forged with a real mission that every church can have a role in lovingly providing a home for people who've been homeless. And our vision and our mission is looking like mobilising, uniting and unleashing Christian prayer, investments, donations and relationships to fight that injustice. And it was started off by the founder who's just left, I've just taken over from him, Ed Walker, who was willing to put some of his own, he got an inheritance, and he decided to use it to buy a house in Peterborough. And from that personal commitment, he was inspired by Isaiah 58 that Jenny referred to about providing the poor wanderer with shelter. And it's really grown. And now, from 2010, we've subsequently opened over 100 homes, and each one of them is in partnership with a church in 34 different towns and cities. And this connection between someone choosing to invest their own money and give sacrificially and provide a home, provide a house, provide the resource that then we can turn into a home. And for each of these homes, they're deeply connected with the church. I'm just going to play, I think I press forward. Do I have to play the video? Let's see, Ben. Okay.
I was injured in Basra in 2005 at the beginning, and with my subsequent wounds and injuries I was given a first medical class discharge. I still craved that adrenaline. I decided to take up a life of drug dealing. I had stopped all that because when I woke up to a dead wife, my perceptions of what I was doing sort of like hit home with a shock, big shock. I just sort of like tied up affairs, the north of England, and ended up in Coventry. And then as the night shelter was finishing in March 2018, this charity health interaction came along, went for the interviews and was invited into the house. It was our home, yeah. All three of us had been long-term homeless. It was brilliant, yeah. We even had a conservatory. How cool is that? Yeah, he helped out immensely. He came to where I was staying, got me my meds, took them back to hospital for me. These people are like willing to be friends without no strings attached, you know, just actual genuine friendship. People actually put their money forward for us to try and assert ourselves back into the real world, and it was brilliant. 5 years' time, I just hope to be as happy as I am now. Genuinely, that's I wish for nothing else, yeah.
I've been in the homelessness game for a long time. That's all I've done since studying. And I've seen a lot of the real dangers of just an overly materialistic, purely approach, that these issues are so relational as well as being to do with resources. And, you know, we can provide new resources, obviously, through the investment of a home. And that's critical, of course. You can't do this without providing actual bricks and mortar. But also new relationships. And that guy there filmed was with his befriender. Each of the churches have a befriending and support team. And it's so brilliant that the way they come alongside people and walk with them. So we provide the professional stuff, you know, a lot of the assessment and the welfare stuff, but the churches are absolutely critical. And a lot of these relationships go on way beyond their tenants with us. You know, they go from being a service user to actually being just a member of the community. And homelessness is so much about addressing all three of these factors. And I believe the gospel is so relevant to all three, because it's about how we use our resources, challenging that maybe that neoliberalism that lives with us, that stores up our money in barns or ISAs or second homes, encouraging people to use that for good, but also not just as a giver to a passive recipient, to enter into a relationship of mutuality. This is what people need. They don't just need handouts at all. They need contributions, places where they can give, places where it's not just transactional, but transformative. And most deeply, the gospel speaks to a new identity. We've got to be more confident about this, about the confidence that it's not just a driver to help people, it's profoundly relevant to the issues that cause homelessness, meaninglessness, unforgiveness, bitterness, resentments, difficulties. There was a report in 2013 called Lost and Found. It was written by an atheist, which said that the secular orthodoxy in homeless services is completely out of kilter with how homeless people view the situation themselves. This was just a quote that someone said to me, a woman who'd been affected by terrible domestic violence. She said to me a couple of weeks ago, my empowerment work, that's the name of our support team, didn't just give me a ladder to help me get out of the situation. She showed me how to build my own staircase. And for me, that's so critical, because it's not about just receiving, it's about then what she can give. And she's starting up her own catering company. I'll just finish with this. I mean, we are really, really keen to partner with more churches, and not to sort of turn you into something that can just give us what we want for our mission, but to empower you to be a presence in your community, to connect to people in need, to offer something that is transformative, but it's also a great channel and vehicle for the gospel message that I know is why we're gathered here today. So thank you.